So welcome one and all. We are on Daf Tet Amud Bet. Really Amud Aleph to Amud Bet. That's what we were doing last. We learned on Shavuot. Remember we had this whole sugya that we did, Binyan Tosefet Shabbat, about adding time on Shabbos. Yeah. So we looked at it as a sugya. I had in mind that I was hoping we could also do something more practical in the Biur Halacha, because he actually gives you I would say a fair amount of the backstory about how Tosefet Shabbat works and the like. But as I was going further and further into it, I was realizing there was going to be a lot of background I was going to have to share about times and start times and end times. If it's okay, by common consent, I'm going to table the ongoing discussion about Tosefet. It's going to take it'll end up being a halacha shir, Biur Halacha, instead of being a shir on the Gemara. So I want to get back to it at some point. I don't know when that's going to be. Maybe like we'll have some other opportunity. We finished this page last time. We did this, but I thought we were also going to have like another sheet, which I had stacked up in my office. But the more I was looking into it, the more I was like, there's going to be a lot of background that I was going to have to share in order to make it, make it work. There is a smaller piece that maybe we'll be able to see, but. Okay, I think we should just go into the, and it referenced our Tosfot, but let's just go on to the Gemara if it's okay. We'll keep it a Gemara shield for now. There's a lot to say about Tosefet and adding, and I'll tell you one sentence that you can sort of think about. I heard this from Rav in Yerushalayim. Tuma is stronger than Tahara, and therefore Tahara is precarious and needs to be protected, and it's a status that you can get to, but you can also lose. And the higher the level of tuma, then the more susceptible an individual who is tahor is to becoming tameh. The Levium, their sefer b'midbar, typify the world of tahara because they have access into the makom hamikdash. The world of the Kohanim is the world of kedusha. Kedusha is stronger. Kodesh is stronger than chol. What's an example of that? You're mostly mechol ala kodesh, Shabbos, Yom Tov, Shvi'it, Yovel, the adding of something. Oh, not Yovel, sorry. The adding of Shvi'it. I should stop there. Those things that have the ability of kodesh to be expanded in its realm. You could be makdish something, yeah, and that there are levels of kedusha as well, as there are levels of tuma on the negative side. There are levels of kedusha, right? So you have the kodesh, you have kodshim kalim, kodshim kodashim, right? There's different layers. This is interesting to consider, and of course, tuma tahara is a prerequisite to get to have an entree into the world of kedusha. Yeah? So just something for consideration. And we just now had learned the headquarters of the issue of Tosefet, at least in Masechet Rosh Hashanah. Again, we saw that there was one in Masechet Moed Katan. There's another one in Masechet Yuma that we'd already previously learned. What we'll learn tonight is another section. We need to just zoom out to remind ourselves what we're up to. In our Mishnah, we're going through the Rosh Hashanah. We're up to the beginning of Tishrei, and we have Rosh Hashanah. Our Rosh Hashanah Tishrei is a Rosh Hashanah for several things. So on page 8b, it had already mentioned, if you just look back at 8b for a minute, it'll be entree to learning our Gemara tonight, so you have sort of a roadmap. In the middle of the narrow column, maybe 10, 12 lines down, the last word on the line was Velashmitin. So that word in a more modern online Gemara would be a hyperlink. When you click, it would take you back to the Mishnah. That's the word from the Mishnah, Velashmitin. And it processed the word Shemitah, opening with the expression. We're going to need this for later tonight. That's why I'm mentioning it. Velashmitin, the Gemara asks, Minalan, how do we know that Rosh Hashanah, Aleph Tishrei, should be the beginning, the onset of Shemitah? And there's a little syntax of the Gemara here, which we're going to see an exact copy of it is coming up in our Gemara later on tonight. Having processed Shemitah, the onset of Shemitah, we get to the Liyovlot. That's 4 lines up from in the narrow lines. Liyovlot, it's a start for Yovel, right? When does Yovel actually start? Right. Well, that's the debate, because in the Mishnah, it says it's Aleph Tishrei. So which is it? So we said, well, there's different mitzvahs associated with Yovel, and those mitzvahs are actually going to have maybe different onset, right? But that will be our focus tonight. So we'll get to it. But that was the discussion. We mentioned that according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, the Benosh Rabbi Shmuel Benosh Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, that maybe the first 10 days was the onset of Yovel for all mitzvot, including the freedom of the slaves. But that 10-day period is a transitional period. Remember, they're sitting with their crowns, they're sitting at the table like landowners. They're eating, they're drinking, they have simcha. And then on Yom Kippur, they don't eat them and drink, obviously, but that's when the shofar is blown, that's when they leave. So that was a machloket. But the reason for it was because on the Abi Rosh Hashanah, it doesn't say Yud Tishrei is one of the Rosh Hashanah, it says it's Aleph Tishrei. So the Gemara was trying to reconcile that. In that context, did the Gemara get into its discussion about Tosefet? Right? That's where it came from. Because when you look 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines up from the bottom, and the widest lines, the last word on line is Tanya Idach. So it's like another Braita. Yovel He. What do the words Yovel He mean? Ma Talmud Lomar. As the Kiddush of the year begins on Aleph Tishrei, but really doesn't actually totally start. Not all of Yovel is turned on until Yud Tishrei. Maybe on the way out, you're also going to add 10 days. It goes to the Yom Kippur into the first year outside of Yovel, like maybe you extend it or something, right? So maybe because there has to be a year of Yovel. So maybe we say there's a year of Yovel, and part of the year of Yovel, in terms of its observance, i.e., the mainstream opinion, meaning Rabbanan hold that on Yud Tishrei, that's when the slaves get freed. So maybe you need a full year. Maybe it goes to Yud Tishrei the following year. And the Gemara here says, no, right? Val Titma. No, you might think that, yeah, because Shari Masif Mechol HaKodesh, because we add from the mundane, the profane time, the non-sacralized time, we add Kodesh to it. So maybe you would think that that's true for Yovel also. So Talmud Lomar, Yovel He. Shnat HaChamishim. Shnat HaChamishim. Right? So the pasuk says Yovel Shnat HaChamishim. So that means Shnat HaChamishim Tamid Gesh, B'yat Tamid Gesh Shnat HaChamishim. V'achat. Right? So you do the 50th year, but not the 50th, and then the first year of the new cycle. We don't do that. And then the top of 9a was Rabbanan said the 50th year is counted as its own year, right? And Rabbi Yehuda disagreed. He thinks that it's a double count. So he thinks it's 49 years. The 49th year, obviously, Shemitah. Year 50 is Yovel. Again, the land lays fallow another year. And that is also, according to Rabbi Yehuda, year 1 of the next count. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which means 6 years later, it's Shemitah again. According to the Chachamim, no, that is its own year called Yovel. And when Yovel finishes, the next year is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the cycle begins anew. Then we had, and we won't go into it, I'm staying just 30,000 feet, so we have like the lay of the land. Then the Gemara got into, oh, you mentioned Tosefet? So how does that work? What's the source of Tosefet? Mosifim Mechol HaKodesh, Machloket, Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva, how you're going to darshan it from the psukim in the Torah. Is it from a pasuk in Parshat Kitisa, or is it from the headquarters of Shemitah and Yovel, which is in Parshat Bahar? Which psukim are going to use? What are you going to learn from it? What are you not going to learn? Then we spent a lot of time on that, and that's why we're on page 9b. In order to learn 9b, we should have done this before. I'm sorry, but we're live, and I'm moving a mile a minute. We need to look at a Tanakh because you have to see the pasuk inside. It's a few psukim, and the whole Gemara is going to turn on how we read these psukim. So we'll just take these, the art scrolls, I guess. Makes sense.
You don't want these.
Is it easier to hand those out? Smaller print. If you're happy, I'm happy. Fine, take those. Okay, stand them up fast. Let's go. This is gonna fall down such a this up here. Then they fall in the middle. Those are part of the fun. There you go. You. Everybody has one? Almost everybody? Do we have enough, everybody? Yeah. Ira, how many do you have there? I gave away my last one. No, I don't have one. That's gonna be a problem.
Oh, here.
I need this pagination. Thank you. Okay, we're good.
Who doesn't have?
Okay, let's go. Look up Parshat Bahar at the beginning of Parshat Bahar. You can find it in the Chumash. In this version, you're looking for Vayikra chapter 25. So when you look in the parak, you just have to look at the psukim, because otherwise this Gemara is very, very confusing. If you look in the psukim, it's much, much simpler. Starting in pasuk Chet, page 148 in the Koren Tanakh. וספרתי לך 7 שבתות שנים, 7 שנים 7 פעמים, והיו לך ימי 7 שבתות השנים, 9 ו40 שנה. I just read that because it's the beginning of the parsha, right? You have to count 7 weeks means 7 times 7 years, right? It's not really weeks, but it's years. And when you count it up, you get to 49. Now, verses 9, 10, and 11, that's our focus for tonight. Okay? Yeah. So here's what we have. Yeah. So pasuk tet, va'avarta shofar trua b'chodesh hashvi ve'asor l'chodesh b'makippurim ta'aviru shofar b'chol ha'aretzachem. You need, number one, you need to blow the shofar on the 10th day of the year, i.e., on Yom Kippur. You're blowing shofar. That is the signal of Yovel. Pasuk Yud. That's one obligation in Yovel. Number 2, v'kidashtem et shana chamishim shana ukratem dror ba'aretz l'chol yoshveha. You're calling for freedom for all those who are in the land. Okay, and that's the sanctification of the 50th year. Then in the same pasuk, there's an etnachta, so that means like semicolon 148. Yovel hi tiyeh lachem. It shall be for you as a yovel. V'shavtem ish el achuzato, v'ish el mishpachto tashuvu. Every man goes back to his apportioned land and goes back to their family, means to their family plot that was given to them at the time of the kibush v'nach. Yoshua be known. Pasuk Yud Aleph, Yovel hi shnat hachamishim shanat yelachem lo tizra'u v'lo tiktzeru seficha v'lo tivtzeru et nizireha. In short, it's like Shemitah again. So it's Yovel in the 50th year. You do not sow, you do not reap, right? And anything that grows on its own, right? You're not gonna reap, and that which is in the on the vines, you're not going to touch it either. That's what you do for Yovel. I note that it is repeated and it says it again. Ki Yovel hi kodesh tiyeh lachem min hasadeh tochlu atvuata. Right. And then again, bishnat Yovel azot tashuv ish lechuzato. Right. So there's repetition. You could say it's for emphasis, but of course, that's not what we'd use it for. That's not why Hashem gave us this. It's not, to make a nice rhetorical point. Every word is teaching us other halachas. We just learned one of them at the beginning of a pasuk Yud Aleph. Yovel hi shnat hachamishim shana was just darshaned on page 8b already to tell you the last 2 lines, right? To tell you the 50th year you're going to be Mekadesh, but not the 50th year and the year after it, right? Even though then it would mean it goes, according to the Rabbanan, basically all in Yovel starts on Yom Kippur, because that's when the slaves are freed, and goes till the end of that year. The Yishmael ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka thought they're actually freed already on Rosh Hashanah, but they spend 10 days like in a transitional period.
Could I just clarify one point? Starts on Yom Kippur, you said ends at the end of that year.
Yeah.
That would be the end of Elul, the end of Tishrei. When you say
End of Elul. Yeah. You're right. Thank you. At the end of the next Elul, right?
There's now
a calendar year called Yovel.
I understand. We now have a gap, right? We don't have a full year.
Correct.
And that eventually that too will get dealt with.
No, that was on 8b. That was the Gemara saying you might think that since you need a full year. Since you need, this is the right question. Since you need a full year, maybe you need an extra 10 days bleeding into the next year. So you could say it went from 10 Tishrei to Tishrei. No, just the 50th year. And Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, obviously, he's a minority opinion, but he kind of looks at the Rabban and says, this is lovely, but it says it has to be a year. I have a year. Mine starts on Rosh Hashanah. Now, they're not freed like they go free, they leave, but they're freed because their status has changed. They're sitting in the master's house at the master's table. Suddenly all the wait staff comes to sit down and they're wearing crowns and they're eating and they're drinking and they're serving them. And then on the Yom Kippur, the shofar is sounded and they go home. Rabbanan say, no, they work till Yod Tishrei and comes Yom Kippur, they hear the shofar and go home. From the fact that the Torah here in Pasuk Yud Aleph emphasize Yovel Hishnat Chamishim Shanat Yelachem, the Gemara in 8b learned it just means just that calendar year, even though it's not actually, according to Rabbanan, a full calendar year. By the way, it is a full calendar year for the return of the people to their lands. That's going to happen.
But only on the 10th.
the onset of it is already, that's already Rosh Hashanah. The drawer is on the slaves.
And you wrote.
But I'm talking about the apportionment of the land. Ishel achuzato, from the achuza that they were given the apportionment of the land at the time of Yeshua bin Nun. That's already the beginning of the year. Yeah. The restrictions on planting from the beginning of the year. So in other words, it's Shemitah and then it's Yovel. There isn't like you have 10 days in between. It's like day 1 and day 2 of Yom Tov. It's like there's like a 10 days in between, so you can do your planting quickly or something. None of that. 2 full years. So the Gemara here now starts to analyze what else we learn about Yovel. And the reason why I did this, I hope it was helpful for you, just give you a roadmap. Like we're just suddenly learning about Yovel. No, the Yovlot. Well, what about Yovlot? Maybe, right? What do we know about it? When does it actually start? Is there a Tosefet? Oh, you mentioned Tosefet? Off-ramp, Tosefet Shabbat, Tosefet Shvi'it, Tosefet Yom Kippurim, etc. It's of Yom Tov, right? Question?
Yeah, well, just looking at the way that the Sukkim are worded, it says, count the 49 years, then on the 10th day of the 7th month. So that's of the following year?
Yeah.
Or of the 49th year?
No, that's on the 50th year. That's on the 50th year. Yeah, but we understand it to be the 50th year because Vavad Shofar True B'Chodesh Shvi, and then it's Pasuk Yud, it's V'Kidashtem Eichnat HaChamishim Shana, right? Although nobody argues that it's in the 49th year. Your point is very well taken because Pasuk Yud, then afterward in a separate Pasuk says V'Kidashtem Eichnat HaChamishim Shana. You're going to sanctify it. Well, are you sanctifying it by the blowing of the shofar, or are you sanctifying because the year started? Question. Then by sanctifying it, you're calling for freedom in the land for all of its inhabitants. And then we have the expression, Yovel hi tiyeh lachem. It shall be for you a jubilee year. Then it says, the next part, which is Vishavtim ishal chuzatov ishal mishpachtot tashuvu. Everyone's going back to their plot of land. So just in the psukim, there's already some questions here about the sequencing. Meaning I just finished telling you that there's going to be a shofar, and that's when the slaves get freed. But the other parts of Yovel actually start at the beginning of the year. But if you look at the order, the shofar was mentioned in Pasuk Tat, then it started mentioning in Pasuk Yud, it sounds like the whole year, doesn't it? You're going to sanctify the 50th year. There happens to be a mitzvah that on the 10th day of that year, you're going to blow the shofar. Fine. But that's not the signal that's starting it off. What's starting it off? The 50th year started. So here are the mitzvahs, yeah? And then in Pasuk Yud Aleph, you have the restriction, which begins at the onset of the year. You could have thought, well, maybe the shofar is sort of like it's the starter gun for the race. The trigger, thank you. And when the trigger happens, so then it starts the whole year. No, only the Karatim Dror Ba'aretz. We're going to see that now in the Gemara inside. But the analysis of the Gemara is going to turn on the fact that the Torah has repeatedly said the words Yovel He. So you have in Pasuk Yud, the beginning of the line there, Yovel He Tiyeh Lachem. And then you have Yud Aleph, Yovel He Shnat HaChamishim Shana. All right. Then you have Pasuk Yud Bet, Ki Yovel He Kodesh Tiyeh Lachem. Keeps mentioning Ki Yovel He. But we knew that already. Yeah.
If you put a comma after Shnat HaChamishim, Yovel Hi Shnat HaChamishim, Shana Tiyeh Lachem, that means it's the whole year. I
hear. So that's one of the reasons why we have the punctuation that we do with the cantillation. That tells us how the sequencing goes. But since you mentioned it, if there was such a drasha in the Gemara, it could do that because the Gemara sometimes darshans words that don't necessarily always fit with the Ta'amei HaMikra, with the cantillation, but the fact that they are juxtaposed, 2 words sitting next to each other, sometimes there is a linkage drawn. In other words, that's another layer of meaning. I spoke about this a couple of Shabbos ago in Shul about the different, right? You have the visual and then you have the auditory, and they're different levels. It's not better or worse, and then there's the machloket, Shem Masoret, Shem Mikra, which is, do we take what's written, how it's spelled, or do we take how it's phonetically pronounced? We had that discussion back in Sukkah, 3 walls and a little bit, 2 walls and a little bit, if you remember. Anyway, the letter Hey and the whole thing. Okay, never mind. All right, so let's go. Top of the page. Tana Rabbanan. Yovel 9b. Tana Rabbanan. Yovel He. Yovel he. Well, which Yovel he are we talking about? That's already a question, right? Yovel he. So the Gemara, there's a little aleph there in 9b. So the Gemara says the box should add the word Yovel. Okay, so Yovel he. It's the Yovel. We'll come back in a minute to what is that? What are those two words on? Because it says it 3 times. Yeah. So Yovel. So there's that aleph from the box tells you that really it should say Yovel. Yovel afapi shlo shamtu. It's Yovel even though they have not actually done the Shmitat Karka, means people going back to their original land apportioned them at the time of Yoshua bin Nun. Afal pi shelo taku, even though they didn't even blow the shofar. So Yachal af pi shelo shalchu. Can it be that it could be Yovel even if they did not send off the slaves? Talmud lamar he. No, the Torah says the word he. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's the first opinion. How do you make heads or tails of it? You look in Rashi. Rashi, top of the page. Yovel he. Yovel, you see that Rashi here, and the Rashi, the Ramachal has the right. Af al gav shelo shamtu. Okay, if you look in the Gemara, it says Yovel he af al pi, but it should be Yovel he Yovel af al gav shelo shamtu. Yeah, see that? Now Rashi, Yovel he tiyelachem le'el minei. Ktiv uvavar teshover kidash mishnah 50 shana ukratim dror. V'hadar ktiv Yovel hi tiyelachem ukra yeterehu ledrasha. So now, what is this talking about? Look in the psukim. That's right. Without the psukim, you're going to get lost. I got lost. I had to sit with the psukim. Go back to pasuk yud. In pasuk yud, you see here the clauses. You have the sanctification of the 50th year, the declaration of freedom in the land for all of its inhabitants. That's the freeing of the slaves. Yovel hi tiyelachem. See that? Okay. You have that line. But prior to it, we have 2 mitzvahs. Number 1, the mitzvah of blowing the shofar and the sanctification of the year, right? And the calling of the freedom for the slaves. So in verse 9, pasuk tet, there's a mitzvah. In pasuk 10, there's a mitzvah. Then it says Yovel hi tiyelachem, and then it says v'shavtem ish el chuzatov ish el mishpatot tashuvu. Okay, so now, did I lose everybody? We got a lot of blank stares.
Is Rashi suggesting these are
Preparatory phases?
things before Yovel starts?
Not before it starts, but maybe the fact that the words Yovel hi tiyelachem is a break between what comes before it and what comes after it. In other words, let's read it inside. So Rashi helps us along. First of the wide, last of the wide lines in Rashi. This is how you should read it. Yovel hi lachem mikol makom. It'll be Yovel for you regardless. Vafilu nasu bo dvarim halalu havarat shofar v'lashuv el achuza dahainu shmitat karkaot shekanu zeh mizeh dichtivna batar haikra v'shavtem ish el achuzato v'afbichein shem hayovel alav liot aser bezriya uvetzira uketzira kidichtiv lo tizreu. Essentially, even if you're not able to do all of the different mitzvahs, you're not actually going to have the blowing of the shofar. That's what you have in verse 9, pasuk tet. Yeah. So you didn't have that one. You didn't blow the shofar. Even if you didn't have the people going back to their land, nonetheless, it would still be right. It would still be Yovel. Yeah, it'll still happen. What is implied by that? You won't be able to do the work of the land. But pasuk yud aleph, there'll still be Yovel for you, so that even if why is it in the middle of that pasuk Yovel hi tiyelachem to tell you, oh, even if you couldn't actually do right. So back in the Gemara, Tan Rabbanan Yovel hi. So Yovel af bishlo shamtu, af bishlo taku. Even if you didn't actually do the Shmitat Karka, which is in the later part of pasuk Yud, even if you didn't blow shofar, which was pasuk Tet, Yachal af bishlo shalchu. So what if you didn't send away the slave? You didn't call the slaves free? Talmud lomar he, meaning that one has to happen. That one has to happen. To say it differently, if you didn't make a call announcing that the slaves are freed, so then you're not going to observe Yovel. That's the linchpin. How come? Because you look in the pasuk. The pasuk says, so this is how I'm reading it. It's Tzvi Engel reading it, not how Rashi reads it, but it's similar, just for ease of use. Pasuk tet, you have to blow the shofar at the beginning of the year on Yom Kippur. You didn't do that? it's still going to be Yovel no matter what. Pasuk Tet, you're going to sanctify the 50th year. How are you going to sanctify the 50th year? You're going to call for the freedom of the slaves. And if you do that, then it's a Yovel for you. Semicolon right there. Stop. Now, and then people should be coming back to their lands that they were given. But if they didn't, is it going to be Yovel anyway? Yes, it is. How do we know? Pasuk Yud Aleph, it's the 50th year. You're not going to be allowed to work in the fields anyway. For Rabbi Yehuda, you need to have the declaration of the freedom of the slaves. That's what sanctifies the year.
Mhm.
Without that, none of the other restrictions of Yovel would obtain. For him, that's the linchpin. Again, look at Rashi from the beginning. Yovel hi tielachem le'el minei tiv. Before those words, so Yovel hi tielachem is pasuk Yud, the beginning of the line, right? Verse 10. Yovel hi tielachem. So that's the one Rashi's quoting. Le'el minei earlier tiv. Before that, it says, meaning the pasuk before, v'vat shofar. You should blow the shofar. And then v'kidashtem echnara chamishim shno kratim jor. Then it says you have to sanctify the 50th year. How do you do that? By declaring freedom in the land. And that those extra words are clearly a drasha. This is how you should darshan those words. Right? It'll be yovel for you regardless. Even if you didn't blow the shofar, because there was no Sanhedrin Gadol, so they didn't blow a shofar in every house, right? So they're gonna blow it in public. They didn't do it.
You blow the shofar throughout the land, not just.
Yeah. But I'm saying, but you need. It seems to be that it's because there's a Beit Din Hagadol that's keeping the count of the years, so you know it's the 50th year. Yeah. So they didn't do that, and let's say they didn't have everyone go back to their allotted portion in Eretz Yisrael. So Shkam Zemi said, afterwards, it says Af al pichen shem Yovel alav. When is it a year that's forbidden in doing agricultural things? A year that is Yovel, where you freed the slaves. But if you didn't free the slaves for whatever reason, couldn't, didn't, whatever, then you would be permitted to do the work in the fields because it's not Yovel. The sanctification of the year for Rabbi Yehuda is in the declaration of the freeing of the slaves. The other things are standalone mitzvahs. You have to blow the shofar, a ritual element. You have to do shmitat karka, special mitzvah, right? But if you didn't do those two things, that's not li'ikuva for it to be a chalot shame of Yovel. What is? The freeing of the slaves. How come? Because that's the words that are in the pasuk of sanctify the 50th year. How? By declaring the slaves free. Then it will be a year of Yovel for you. Semicolon, And also there's another mitzvah. But if you don't get there, still going to be Yovel. And what's the net result then? Next pasuk, Yovel is that 50th year. Don't do any planting or reaping in the field. That's Rashi's view of what's happening here. Yeah.
I still don't understand how Rabbi Yochanan can dispense
Rabbi Yehuda?
with working in the field based on the first two commandments.
Dispense with it, how? The prohibition of working in the field.
Prohibition.
He only dispenses with it if you didn't free the slaves. If you did free the slaves, then it's a Yovel.
But if I said, okay, if you don't like candles and you don't make kiddush, then there's no Shabbos. You can do work. I mean, that
wouldn't wash, right?
It doesn't make sense to me in the actual shot of the Torah. It doesn't really make sense within the shot of the Gemara, because you'd still then have to say, well, what do I do with that not work the field pasuk? And I don't know what you do with that, except to say, well, that doesn't really matter.
It's not that it doesn't matter. It's that it is.
No.
It is not a standalone pasuk. It is somehow dependent on one of the main elements that started off. Yovel is its own. I like your analogy, but don't forget that Shemitah is compared to Shabbos, and Yovel is compared to Yom Tov.
Okay. So,
right, I know what you're going to say now, but it's going to be Yom Tov if you don't make kiddush, you don't like candles. Yeah.
If you don't make candles.
Yeah.
If you don't do it.
Yeah. Still going to happen.
I mean, if I want to get out of second day Yontif, I can just not make kiddush and not make motzi and then.
No such drasha. I didn't hear you say that. Cancel, delete.
But I'm saying that that dependency doesn't exist.
Right.
The same way this dependency.
For
doesn't,
sure.
That dependency doesn't exist.
Yovel is a unique halacha that is, you're correct, 100% right. That's where the analogy breaks down, is that Yovel, let's say, unlike Sfirat HaOmer,
Right, right.
whether you're counting or not, it's still going to be Shavuos, right?
Right.
It's going to happen.
Right.
But on Yovel, the whole thing is built around the idea that there's some kind of an ongoing count, and there are certain conditions that are being met. Most of us probably know one of the conditions is Rov Yoshveh Aleh, right? Most Jews have to be living in Eretz Yisrael for that to happen. You know that, yeah? About Yovel. So that's like another piece, which also about impacts Shemitah. You are right. It's a strange halacha regarding Yovel. And Rabbi Yehuda thinks that you could actually still have a year of Yovel fall apart if you didn't do just one of those mitzvahs. The other mitzvahs, not as important somehow. It's like what typifies the element of freedom and gives the onset of the year. By the way, Rabbi Yossi disagrees with the next line. We see Rabbi Yossi, you say, okay, wait a second. Rabbi Yossi looked at the same sugya. Obviously, he read them differently. He didn't like what Rabbi Yehuda said. Maybe that sort of illuminates. So we'll move a few more lines. Line 4, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Yovel he. Okay. We're familiar. We know which one we're talking about probably. Ava pishlo shamtu. Okay. Ava pishlo shalchu. Oh, even if they didn't send away the slaves. Yachol ava pishlo taku. Talmud lo marhi. So if you didn't blow the shofar, then it falls apart. The shofar is the trigger, not the freeing of the slaves. Yovel, Yovel he. I shouldn't say he, sorry. Yovel, Av Bishlo Shalchu, Vein Yovel, Ela Im Kain Taku, Levisha Shel Olam Below Shiluach Avadim, V'Ef Shel Olam Below Tkiyat Shofar. So Rabbi Yossi, who seems to agree with the basic premise that the words Yovel he Yelachem are somehow superfluous, and therefore they're open for a drasha. There's something they're conveying, but what is that? Rabbi Yossi thinks that it means that even if you didn't do the Shmitat Karka, which is Vishavtim Ishel Chuzato, even if you didn't send away the slaves, it would still be Shemitah, it would still be Yovel. But what about if you didn't blow the shofar? No, then it would all fall apart. Why? Because it says Yovel hit Yelachem. So the Gemara asks, what? How could this be? Now, if you look in Rashi, hold your finger there, Rashi. Talmud Lomar, he ima sidat dvarim halalu he Yovel, v'im lav eino Yovel. Ulakaman ulakame mefarish v'Yovel my chazi detali b'kriyat dror. So the word here is he. All right, with the fact that it said he, Rabbi Yossi says, even though you didn't do the Shemitah Karka, even though you didn't send the slaves away, so you think maybe even if you didn't blow the shofar? No. In the end, we say the word here is, it says he, meaning Yovel he means that if you did these things, then it will be Yovel, and if not, it won't be a Yovel. So what are these things? The blowing of the shofar? That's it? So this is strange. And if you look in the Pasuk, right, the Pasuk makes it even stranger, because where's the shofar Pasuk? Pasuk Tet. It's a totally different Pasuk, right? It's almost like Rabbi Yehuda reads it like this. Rabbi Yossi, I mean. If you blow the shofar, you're going to sanctify the 50th year, right? Ukratim jorel ba'aretz l'chol yosvei yovel hit yelachem b'shavtem ish l'chuz mishpachli yeshuvu yolik shnana chamishim shanat yelachem lo tizro. So if you made it a yovel year by blowing the shofar, so then you have the restrictions on the use of the land. If you didn't blow the shofar, it's not going to work. So the Gemara says, wait, you're using one pasuk that's both marbe, and then another and then you're using it also to be mamid to minimize. In other words, it's a limit and it's an expansion. So Rabbi Yossi explains, why did I say this? Mipnei ma ani omer yovel, alpha pishlo shalchu, ve'ein yovel elim kain taku. So how can you say it's yovel even though they didn't send away the slaves? But it is a yovel. It won't be a yovel if they didn't actually build a shofar. because you could have a world where there are no slaves in the world. Rashi, it's possible that no Jews have slaves. It's possible that slavery is abolished and there are no slaves. I'm getting ahead of myself to put that into Rabbi Yossi, but that is what he said. But he had some liberal-minded idea in there. I don't know. I doubt it. But okay, it makes for a nice drasha. But the Gemara here points out, but it's impossible to have a Jewish world where people don't have shofarot, where they can't blow the shofar. Therefore, they're going to blow the shofar no matter what. They blow the shofar, then it's going to be a Yovel year, even if there are no slaves to be freed. For Rabbi Yehuda, it was a prerequisite. He gives you a davar acher, right? Davar acher, zu mesur lebeitin, v'zu ena mesur lebeitin. Because the beitin is the one that's in charge of the blowing of the shofar, right? The actual shofar. There's going to be a shofar in the world, but davar acher, Rashi, davar acher tikiyat shofar mesur lebeitin litzavot lishlucham litkoa v'shiluach avadim mesur leichidim v'ma'en yivatel hayovel hilkach lo tilu hakatuv bo, meaning lo tlao hakatuv bo. It's not dependent on whether the people follow suit in letting out the slaves. What it depends on is the Beit Din in charge of declaring it's the year of Yovel? The answer is yes, because they're the ones sending out the shlichim to tell everybody blow the shofar in Yom Kippur. Yeah. So now the Gemara says, wait, my davar acher. Why did you give me a davar acher? Why wasn't it good enough to just say there could be a world with no slaves, but there can't be a world with no shofar? And they had to say, oh, it's a Beit Din thing. If you're going to tell me it's impossible, it's somewhere out there in the world, outside of the land of Israel even. There isn't some chor ba'olam, a Jew with a slave. There must be somewhere. So if you think that there might be someone out there, and therefore if they don't free the slaves, maybe that therefore won't be Shemitah. So I'm Yovel, I mean, so no, so the whole thing is not related to the freeing of slaves, not freeing of slaves. That's a mitzvah on the slave owners, but on the masters. But what is the Beit Din doing? They're blowing shofar and saying it's Yovel now. They determine, and that's what's going to make the difference. Bishlam of Rabbi Yossi, Kiddik Amar Ta'ameh. Rabbi Yossi explained his rationale, didn't he? He explained, because without the blowing of the shofar you take the fallback opinion, the davar acher, it belongs to the Beit Din. It's their decision. People are going to go back to their land. They're not going to go back to their land. They're going to follow the mitzvah of shiluach havadim. They're not going to do shiluach havadim. That the Beit Din is going to decide. We understood that. El Rabbi Yehuda, my timer. So, Rabbi Yehuda, what's your rationale? Why do you think it's all dependent on the freeing of the slaves? Amar kra ukratim dror ba'aretz. V'kasavar, it says in the Torah, you shall declare freedom in the land. V'kasavar mikra nidrash lefanav lo lifnei panav. He holds that you can darshan the part of the pasuk that comes right before the part you want to darshan, but not two portions before. So if you look at it in the words of the Torah, he says, when it says the words Yovel Hitiyalachem, to tell you that everything is conditioned on one aspect of Yovel being fulfilled, that must be the words that come right before it. But you can't backdate it back to Pasuk Tet, which is about the blowing of a shofar. That's two psukim ago. It's not connected to the words Yovel Hitiyalachem. So Kasavar Mikra Nidish Lefanav Lifnei Fanav. Dekule Alma Dror Lashon Cherut. Everyone holds that dror means freedom. My mashma. Where do we get this idea? Tanya, ein dror lashon cherut. Right? As you learn, dror means freedom. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, ma lashon dror kimedar be dayara, umovil schora b'chol medina. The dror means that you could live wherever you want to live, and you can do business wherever you want to do business. According to the name of I think it was the Gra, who wondered why did it say here about business? What does business have to do with freedom? So he said in the Megillah Esther points at vidar v'socharet. Vidar v'socharet, and dar means the dwelling, socharet is the business. So the same lashon was used here. It's an interesting idea. We're essentially out of time, but I'll do one more sentence just to confuse you even further. Rabbi Chia bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan, Zudi Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yossi. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. That's Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Aval Chachamim Omrim Shloshtem Ma'akvot Bo. You need all three: freeing the slaves, blowing the shofar, going back to the land, giving back the land to the portion. If you didn't do that, falls apart completely. And there isn't going to be a Yovel observance if you don't do all three of them. In other words, for them, the bar is much higher. We'll have to come back to it, God willing, next week. In Health and Happiness, 7:30 next Wednesday night. Adkan.